underlying everything, I think, has got to be that moral question. What is a good society? What is our definition of a good society? The kind of society that Donald Trump wants is not my definition of a good society.
Now it's a privilege to introduce tonight's speakers. Robert Reich is the former Secretary of Labor under Bill Clinton, has served in 3 presidential administrations, written 19 books, spent 40 years as a beloved professor of public policy, and as an ambassador of progressive economics. His highly anticipated memoir, Coming Up Short, is his only book that covers his entire life, including his parents, his own failures, disappointment, aging, lost friends, while offering practical solutions to build a better America based on lessons from half a century in political involvement. Senator Bernie Sanders has called it important and galvanizing. Joining Reich on stage tonight is his longtime friend of 60 years, Richard Parker, award-winning biographer who has taught for over 30 years at Harvard's Kennedy School of Government. Parker is also the co-founder of the magazine Mother Jones and former advisor to Greek Prime Minister George Papandreou. Now please join me in welcoming Robert Reich and Richard Parker.
All right, why don't we get started? Bob and I have known each other since we were 17 years old. We come from a different world than exists today, and we like this one a lot better for a lot of reasons, although we have a few complaints, which we'll be talking about in the course of the evening. Bob and I went to college and graduate school, had only white male professors in the years that we were students, and we had only male classmates, as best I can recollect, in those years, because that was what elite education was 60 or 70 years ago. The joy of teaching for me, and I think for Bob as well too, although he can speak to it, is that for 30 years, I walked into classrooms that were a UN General Assembly of experiences. And I have continued to learn and treasure my teaching for what those students have taught me, and hope that the work that Bob and I and others like us of our generation are trying to do will give them the grounding and the confidence to keep moving forward. I especially want to say how much I enjoyed this book of Bob's. Bob's written 12.5 books. I think that's about right. And I've read at least half of them. I won't say which ones I've missed. I laughed my way through Locked in the Closet, which if you haven't read, I really...
Locked in the Cabinet.
Locked in the Cabinet, sorry. If I remember his name at the end of this, I'll be having a good evening, so just bear with us. But this book accomplishes something that I think is both really a testimony to Bob, but also what exactly is needed right now. Because those earlier books that Bob wrote were classic studies in issues of policy and institutional politics. And what Bob has created here is an examination of underlying values that underpin those institutions, and moreover has narrated it in the context of his own life. He's put himself up front in the book in a way that I think makes it an incredibly human book. And I understand how much when I read that last chapter of finishing teaching at Berkeley after all those years, why a tear came to his eye. And what I'm hoping is that tonight he is going to leave you inspired to make sure that the values that he has tried to teach all these years are carried forward by you. So thank you for coming out to hear Bob speak. Let me open this in the way that you do, Bob, because you framed the book from the beginning about the experience of being young and being bullied. And it becomes a metaphor that you're able to then transfer to the politics of the present that also underline the values of democratic societies in the process?
A lot of people feel bullied. Many people have been bullied. And we have now, as president, a bully in chief who doesn't necessarily take pleasure in bullying, but maybe he does. The entire program that he is pushing on America has to do with imposing a certain order and brutality on everyone else, on demanding submission. Now, putting those ideas together, that is the bullying, the vulnerability, the powerlessness, and somebody demanding submission, I think that, and what I'll try to do, Richard, in the book, is suggest that Donald Trump is not the source of many of the problems we are now experiencing and the tensions and stresses that we are now witnessing. Donald Trump is the consequence, the culmination of decades in which many people in this country felt bullied by the system. They felt that they were voiceless, that they were vulnerable, powerless, they were angry, and many of them decided to elect their own bully. I think that the real problem that Donald Trump represents and the problem we've got to address as a society, and we could not have, in my view, my humble view, is we couldn't have continued down the road we were going in terms of inequality widening year by year. And with that inequality, also a kind of corruption increasing year by year. We called it campaign contributions and public relations and other things, but large corporations and wealthy individuals abusing their wealth and their power year by year in a greater and greater way, polluting our system with money in ways that I think inevitably caused a great deal of demoralization, caused a lot of people to feel that the system was not worth it, that the system was rigged against them. And that is really where we are today.
You've lived a life in public service, and nowadays so many young people are coming out of schools like Harvard and choosing to go to tech in Silicon Valley, or go to Wall Street in finance, or go to McKinsey for corporate consulting. You've chosen a different path. You've chosen to work in government. You've chosen to teach about government. You've chosen to commit your life to writing about what it means to be in public service. Talk a little bit for me about where that comes from in you and what it is that you tried to communicate to your students.
Well, it comes from the fact that I was born when you were. How many of you were born in or around 1946? Any baby boomers? Okay. Well, let me just say.
All of you hold up your Medicare cards together and we'll just wave.
I mean, George W. Bush and Donald Trump and Bill Clinton were all born in 1946. I was born in 1946. Richard, you were born in 46?
I was born on Election Day in 1946.
There's no excuse for that. I mean, Cher, Dolly Parton, anybody who's anybody was born in 1946. Demographers wonder, why the baby boom? Well, it was very simple. My father was in World War II, and he came home, and there was my mother. You don't have to really be. This is not a complicated issue. But what was, I think, very important is that we all, the people who received the legacy of the so-called greatest generation that went through the Depression and World War II, that made extraordinary sacrifices and worked extraordinarily hard, created an opportunity for the largest middle class the world had ever seen. America certainly had never seen. And I didn't know it at the time. I was a little boy, but we were facing a society that really provided opportunities and possibilities of a sort that was extraordinary in world history, extraordinary. And the question I try to address here, Richard, is why we, that is, those of us born boomers and others who were near boomers, Hillary Clinton, Clarence Thomas, other people who I know. I dated Hillary Clinton.
But not Clarence Thomas.
But not Clarence Thomas. And I dated her before she was Clinton. Let me make that very clear. But we all failed in a way. I think we took for granted much of that what was given to us. We didn't fight the battles hard enough, and I include myself in that. I in writing this book, what forced me to do is to go back over the battles I fought and lost, and relive them, and it was painful.
But we've won a number of them too. I mean, the change in what the academic experience that you and I had 60 years ago and the academic experience today is a measure of just how much has changed. And it seems to me that we're losing our nerve in telling proudly what our successes have been.
Well, undoubtedly. And I'm very proud of what we, quote unquote, it's hard to generalize about an entire generation, but we did in terms of civil rights and voting rights and the rights, equal marriage rights, and the changes that we helped usher through. And you and I both were demonstrated against Vietnam and Vietnam War. We were both. I was clean for Gene. Were you? Were you in the Gene McCarthy?
I was a Gene person too. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I mean, there was a sense of efficacy that I remember having when I went to college with civil rights and the anti-Vietnam War movement. I think we had agency. We felt like our generation could actually do things, and the surprise was. I think it occurred in the years, the Carter and the Reagan years. And I focus on those here, because those were the years in which there was a great U-turn. The country really did revert, especially under Ronald Reagan, to a very different country. And the promise of upward mobility started to be a sham. The median wage, as you know, the median wage started to stagnate. More and more of the national wealth and income went to the top. People became, and certainly by 2008 and the financial crisis, when the banks got bailed out, and millions of homeowners and people lost their jobs and their savings, they were not helped. And I think that disillusionment that came out of that especially helped create the predicate for what we are now seeing.
Talk a little bit about how the parties changed in those periods, because the nature of the Democratic-Republican binary has changed in our lifetime in dramatic ways, and arguably has been either emblematic of or causal in some ways of that change. And you have worked inside and outside at the edge of the Democratic Party now for half a century. What have you seen change about it?
Well, both parties have changed dramatically. Both parties 10 years ago, 15 years ago, were nothing more than giant financial machines designed to raise as much money as possible for candidates who were especially targeted at the so-called swing votes. Now, the Republican Party is a bunch of zombies. They really are marching only to what Donald Trump says. They're afraid of being primaried. If they even vary a little bit from the Trump line, and some of them have confessed to me that they're afraid of being violently attacked, or their families. This is not child's play. The Democratic Party, I think, is in complete and total disarray. Now, I've said that for the past 40 years. But I,
Will Rogers, I'm not a member of an organized political party. All right, I'm a Democrat.
but the disarray now is, to me, unforgivable, because what the Republicans under Trump have done is create a set of cultural populist targets, scapegoats, to explain away why so many people are angry, why so many people feel that they can't get ahead despite working as hard as they are doing. And those cultural scapegoats have to do with, well, we all know what they're immigrants. They're the so-called deep state. They're transgender people. There are all kinds of kind of boogeyman that Donald Trump and the Republicans around him have created. And it's a cynical exercise. What the Democrats need to do, what they should have done in 2016 and certainly 2020, 2024, what they should have done is said, no, the reason so many people are not getting ahead, the reason the whole system feels rigged against you is because it is rigged against you. And it's rigged against you because of the large corporations, the financial companies, Wall Street, and the people who are the wealthy, extraordinarily wealthy people who are putting a great deal of money into politics. In 2024, we know now that 10 people contributed $3 billion to the Republican Party. One person contributed $250 million to Donald Trump. We know him. We can even know his name.
Some of us drive his cars.
No. But you get my point. A few years ago, this would have been outrageous. We would have been up in arms. We have now normalized this kind of, and it is corruption. It is corruption. Let's not kid ourselves. Congress, too many Democrats march to where the money is. They are afraid to bite the hands that feed their political coffers. And as long as they are in that position, and they've been in that position for quite some time, we are not going to have a loyal opposition that is capable of taking on the Republicans.
Do you draw hope, though, I certainly do, from the number of organizations like Swing Left or Move On or any of dozens out there now that are not attached to the party, but that are progressive and attempting to influence the party, including influencing the outcome of elections? There's a lot of money that's been raised from small donors. It may not be the $3 billion from 100 donors. It may be $1 billion from 300,000 donors. But isn't there some way to see hope in that?
Richard, I'm very hopeful.
Okay.
No, I really. Seriously, we haven't come to the part of our discussion where we should get to the hopeful part.
Right.
But I think part of hope is that the Democrats and the Republicans are beginning to see they don't need the gigantic contributions. They can actually do as well, if not better, from small donors, a lot of small donors, great numbers of small donors. It's very hard to get them to see that. It's a struggle. I think you're right. I think that's cause for hope.
Good. Talk a little bit about what you see as the key offenses of the Trump administration to date. I mean, I want to give you a softball that you can.
No, that is the
just your three favorite.
Well, I think that we are really moving from authoritarianism. Mm-hmm. And let me just be clear with everybody about this. I have been in government. I've studied government. I've looked historically in the United States and elsewhere at what has happened with different regimes and different governments. we are very close to what might be termed neo-fascism right now. And I say that, and I use that term advisedly, because it's not authoritarianism. Authoritarianism rests on a bureaucracy that marches to what an authoritarian leader wants. This is much more centralized in one person. This is a strong man. This is more analogous to Mussolini or Hitler or Stalin. This is one person who is calling all the shots. And it's not only all the shots politically and all the shots in terms of the people around him, like Stephen Miller or Russell Voigt, deciding what's going to happen tomorrow, what this week's events are going to be, what executive orders are going to be signed. But it's also starting to leach out into the economy. More and more of what Trump is doing as a strongman, quote unquote, has to do with individual decisions about individual corporations and individual tariffs, which should be called, actually, instead of tariffs, they should be called import taxes, and individual deals with particular countries and people. So we have an economy that is becoming less and less about supply and demand, and more about these kinds of arbitrary and capricious decisions by this one strongman. Now, the one advantage, the one possibly, again, I'm seeking positive things to say. There is something very positive here, because this cannot go on. Somebody who fires everybody around him, anybody who questions his authority, anybody who disagrees with what he wants to do, does not, by definition, have any feedback about what he's doing. Does not, by definition, have any critical judgment, because all the critical judgment has been purged. And somebody like that is heading for a huge fall. And that could happen any time. What worries me is the collateral damage to a lot of innocent people.
Yeah, no, I've got a daughter-in-law who finished with a PhD in climate science last June and landed her dream job at the EPA. And you can just imagine.
I'm very sorry.
Yeah, so is the EPA.
And I'm sorry for all of us.
Yeah.
Because the talent.
The losses are personal as well. I'm sure there are plenty of those stories here.
Well, these are both personal tragedies, but they're also huge tragedies for the country in terms of the loss of talent that has been accumulated over decades in many of these positions. The Justice Department, the IRS, the Treasury, the State Department, you go through what we have been losing. The National Institutes of Health, the National Science Foundation, the USAID. Wherever you look, you see talent and capacity lost.
Yeah. You have, both in this book, but for quite some time, made the argument that inequality, primarily first economic inequality in terms of income and wealth, but other forms of inequality are at both the heart of your analysis and also at the heart of your prescription for how to escape the situation that we found ourselves in. Talk a little bit about how inequality has changed in the United States in our lifetimes. You and I were beneficiaries of a 30-year-long run as we grew up of declining inequality across the board. And then shortly after we left our college studies and entered the real world, that turned and it became a V shape in which now we have nothing but rising inequality year after year after year with a break here or there.
That was what I was trying to get at before.
Yeah.
When I talked about the great U-turn.
Yep.
That is something that occurred starting in 78, but extending to a much greater extent in the 80s, where inequality widened. And the dynamic here is a ratchet effect. That is, as more and more resources of the nation's income and wealth begin to concentrate at the top, the people at the top and the institutions, the corporations at the top, have more and more political power if there is no constraint on spending that money for political purposes. And when I say political purposes, I don't just mean campaigns. It's also being spent on public relations. It's being spent on armies of litigators to change the laws, to change the rules. And we could go on and on. But the point is, as wealth and income go to the top, and as this capacity turns into kind of political power, you get more and more distortion of a political economic system. And that distortion itself feeds on itself because the next round, you get obviously more power and more wealth going to the top.
In our lifetimes, we've additionally seen the U.S. economy more deeply integrated into a global economy than we had ever imagined possible. I think the sum of imports and exports when you and I were in college was maybe 10% of GDP. It's well together over a third of GDP now. And what doesn't perplex me, but challenges me, is to try to think about what the instruments are that we could use to lessen American inequality in a world in which there is so much leakage going out of the American economy and into foreign economies. And you also have an enormous amount of corporate gaming of tax liabilities and labor rules and everything else. What are your thoughts on what the challenges are that globalization brings to our recovering a domestic democracy?
Well, globalization is one of those words that has gone from obscurity to meaninglessness.
Quickly, too.
Without any intervening period of coherence. We've always been in a globalized economy. When I first began exploring and inquiring into inequality, why inequality was widening, the standard explanations were globalization and technological change. Everybody said, well, it's globalization because obviously things will be done in the cheapest place to do it. And that's going to put a burden on low-skilled people in the United States or in every advanced country. And at the same time, technology is going to take away the jobs of low-skilled people, and they are going to have to move into the low-paid service sector. And that was going to be every advanced country was going to. Well, the interesting thing happened, and that is not every advanced country suffered the same inequality. In fact, many advanced countries found that there were things that they could do politically to reduce inequality and to reduce the possibility of this kind of ratchet that I'm talking about. And what we have now is many so-called advanced countries that they have more inequality than they did 20 or 30 years ago. They have as much globalization, if not more, than the United States. They have as much technological change, if not more, than the United States, but they don't have as much inequality. And why not? Because they have stronger laws against the abuse of wealth in terms of political corruption. I'm going to use that word. I hesitate to use the word corruption, but I am. I think it's the best way of describing it. They do not allow the degree of legalized bribery we do in this country.
It's also the case that there are stronger social democratic parties in most of those countries as well, too. Isn't that true? And also stronger trade unions that act as countervailing forces politically in this struggle for distribution. Or do you not think that's as important?
No, I think that those are important, but they beg the question. That is, in the 50s, in 1955, 35% of the workers in the United States in the private sector were unionized. Now today, it's now down to 6%. There's no, when John Kenneth Galbraith wrote about countervailing power, he was writing in the 50s. He thought that the union portion of the workforce would continue to expand. Actually, because of the political forces that were unleashed in the late 70s and early 80s, corporations felt less and less bound to respect unions. And they started to bash unions. They started to move their corporate factories and also operations to non-unionized states. They began to very aggressively fire workers who had every legal right to organize unions. This did not happen in other countries.
And again, what you're underscoring is the political nature of economic change, which I think is really one of your contributions, to just keep banging that drum again and again and again.
Richard, it's the right drum. Because politics underlies all of this. You can't separate economics from politics.
Thank you.
Well, you're welcome.
Harvey Cox wrote a wonderful essay some 35 years ago in which he made, I thought, a persuasive argument that with the collapse of traditional religion, the void had been filled by the idea of the market. Because what else was omniscient, omnipotent, and omnipresent, if not the market in American political life? And I think that we need to tip our hat at the deity, even as we struggle against offer our heresies.
But this is, this is fairly new. In the 19th century, there was no separate discipline called economics until Alfred Marshall came along in 1890. It was all political economy. And everybody, most of the people studying it did not try to differentiate between politics and economics. If you go back to the 18th century, it was not even political economy. Adam Smith did not call himself a political economist. He called himself a moral philosopher. It was all about what is a good society. And underlying everything, I think, has got to be that moral question. What is a good society? What is our definition of a good society? The kind of society that Donald Trump wants is not my definition of a good society. Now it's easy here in this bubble of Cambridge.
Bubble of Cambridge?
Years ago, I moved to Berkeley from
To
Cambridge.
get out of the bubble. Yeah, oh, great.
And
We'll talk afterwards, Bob.
I discovered I was still in the same bubble. But the weather was better. But truly, we're talking about values. We're talking about morals. Diversity, equity, and inclusion are good things. I don't know how. How one, and I'm going to use again the term strongman, authoritarian, can convince so many people that they are not.
Isn't their claim that it has been a set of rights that have been asymmetrically distributed? Isn't that sort of what they're arguing? We can argue back with it, but isn't that sort of their claim?
I think the claim, if to the extent that there's any moral claim here, is a claim of white privilege, a claim that white people ought to be somehow dominant. Behind a lot of this is social Darwinism. The old doctrine that there is survival of the fittest. This is not new. Nothing of this is new, but it's been dressed up in a new package that I think is very attractive to, again, going back to what I started to say initially, very attractive to people who feel that they've been bullied, feel that they're not getting ahead, no matter how hard they work, feel that the entire system has been rigged against them, and it has. So it's not that these ideas are new that Trump is peddling. It's that they are finding an audience, a terrain that makes them very, very popular.
Mm-hmm. Do you think that the Democratic Party is capable of differentiating itself enough from, whether we call it neoliberalism or we call it a centrism that isn't addressing your issues or our issues, that it can find an identity that gives it back political power? Because we can talk about values all we want, but they have to be exercised and defended in the context of real political power.
Well, this is where the silver lining comes in. This is where my optimism comes in. Because I think that where we are now, not only in terms of widening inequality and corruption, legalized corruption, but something we haven't even talked about, but closely allied to all of this, is the destruction of the environment, the destruction of the earth. We could not, again, let me emphasize, go down the road, continue to go down the road that we were on. Inevitably, in economics, in politics, in corruption, in pollution, and climate change, we were coming to the end of that road. Unfortunately, the Democrats did not lead the revolution. The Democrats missed a huge and important opportunity. If this were the 1930s and we had a president named Franklin D. Roosevelt, the Democrats would have risen.
It is easier to think. Yeah, right.
It would have been, the Democrats would have found their voice. But now there is the possibility. I see Democrats, backbenchers or young people all around the country who are coming up and are telling the truth as we've talked about it, and are telling it in terms of a lens that is moral about the values, about the society we want. And I find it very encouraging. I'm not sure that they could have found their voice, honestly, Richard, if we hadn't come to this terrible calamitous tragedy.
I've got 4 former students running for Congress, and I must tell you, I feel the same way, Bob. I mean, their ability to combine serious political and policy viewpoints with a sense of being human and of wanting to build a human community, not of having vengeance wreaked on my enemies, not about how to transfer more money to fewer people. These are the next generation. And I'm really very hopeful for them.
I've been teaching for 44 years. Mm-hmm. I retired just the year before last. But my most recent generations of students are the most committed, mm-hmm. the smartest, mm-hmm. And the most determined to change this society. And that gives me enormous hope.
Mm-hmm. I'm going to give you the... Before we turn to question and answer, you and I exchanged a few words about despair and blaming, which we are hearing too much of these days. Would you share a thought on why it is that neither despair nor blaming right now are the ways to go about reconstructing the world?
Well, it's easy to fall into despair, mm-hmm. right? And it's also easy for many people to get angry and blame them or them or them or them. It's also easy for some people to deny that we are in the predicament we are. Mm-hmm. And I believe it or not, if you get outside the bubbles that I live in,
Brookline,
or the bubble
go to
you're
Watertown, there's
there
rumbles.
There are people who are still denying that we are in a terrible state. But what I tell my students and what I tell others is that the most important thing right now is to get out of denial and despair and blame and ask yourself what you can do. And don't wait to be rescued. There is nobody who is going to rescue us. There's an old saying, we are the leaders we've been waiting for. Well, this is the time that saying really becomes very significant. People ask me all the time, well, why are you writing so much? Why are you doing these videos? And why are you, I have writing books and, you're pushing 80. Why are you doing all of this? And I say, the President of the United States is also pushing 80. And if a sociopath can cause as much mayhem, I can do a little bit of good trouble.
There we go.
Right?
So on that note of causing good trouble, let's turn to the audience.
Bob, something that you mentioned or didn't mention is that there's this pimple, Donald Trump, who will burst. But I wonder, he is a strong man, but behind him are 50 years of racist, Republican, capitalist kinds of things, which are embodied in Project 2025. So if Trump were to disappear, would that plan still unfold?
If Trump were to disappear, would we still be in the trouble we are in? Would Project 2025 and the people around it still be causing as much mayhem? Well, the answer is yes, for a while, because they have the power. We're talking about power. Hello, people. This is a matter of how things get done. And if the Republican Party has turned into a cult, and I think it's fair to say it has turned into a cult, and the congressional Republicans don't dare do anything that could cause that cult to be alarmed or angry, and if the Democrats still remain relatively silent, then and if the Supreme Court stays where it is, we've got a perfect storm. But none of that is likely to stay put. I mean, nothing that I've just said is likely to stay exactly as it is. This is where our work comes in, all of us. This is where we have to work to change the leadership of Congress, change Congress in 2026. This is where we've got to work at the state level to make sure that we have state governments that are willing to, as several states are now, willing to stop or at least put up a fight with regard to what Trump and Washington are doing. We've got to make sure that this country gets the facts and people get the knowledge that they need. And that's where a lot of us come in terms of spreading the truth. You can't get anywhere if the truth is not being spread. So defeatism, denial, despair, as we were just talking about, does get us absolutely nowhere. I am optimistic about the longer-term future. I'm worried about the short-term future.
Hi, Bob. My name is Radi. I'm from Indonesia. I'm an American, but your words resonate with me. In my country right now, people are very sad, very angry. If you watch the news, people died on the streets against the police. And I feel what you feel. Americans, we also feel deep inequality. So it is not an issue that is unique to America alone. And your words have inspired me, Bob. And I'm now a student in Harvard, and I want to do something for my country. So I want to thank you first on that. And I want to ask you, reflecting on your long life, what would be the thing that you would do differently or you would do much more earlier, especially maybe as an advice for young people like me who wants to do something for our country? Thank you so much.
I think that I assumed that the institutions of our democracy were stronger than they actually are. This is connected to my, I don't want to say complacency, But in retrospect, I think it was a certain complacency, a certain assumption that everything would remain whole, that the center would hold, not political center, but the center would hold in the sense of the institutions that are needed by a democracy, the media, science, the universities. I assumed, for example, that the universities could not be cowed by a dictator, that power was decentralized enough. Now, let me just say something. It's delicate to talk about this issue just a few feet from where decisions are being made vis-a-vis Harvard University. But I want to commend Harvard to the extent that Harvard is standing up against this tyranny. But I also just want to say something else. And this is really about what other universities need to understand, in my view, and what law firms and what the media and everybody else needs to understand. Number one, it is not possible to appease a tyrant. You cannot appease a tyrant. Any attempt to appease a tyrant invites more tyranny. That's number one. Number two, really the only way to deal with a tyrant is to join with others. That is, if I were advising Harvard, and that's not going to happen, I don't think, but if I were advising Harvard, I'd say, use your position as the preeminent university and the wealthiest university by far as an umbrella for the entire university system of America, for all the research universities of America. Use your umbrella to join everybody together to make the case that our research universities are essential for our competitiveness as a nation. They are essential for our future, for our innovation as a nation. That you, Donald Trump, cannot destroy the research universities of America. That would be shooting us, it is shooting us in the feet. Make that case, Harvard. And I would say the same thing with the same thing with law firms. I mean, the idea that you can divide and conquer these law firms, in particularly big law firms, Washington and New York, or big media companies. You know, you sue ABC and CBS and make them sort of models of intimidation. Well, no. What has to happen is that these institutions need to work collaboratively. They need to work together to be a common front against this tyranny. A couple of weeks ago, I was on a show on television, and it was, what's his name? Late night?
Stephen Colbert.
Stephen Colbert.
There we go. Between the two of us, we can pull up most names.
You know, that is one thing that happens with age, the memory. But Stephen Colbert, I do remember. I talked with Stephen Colbert, and he's terrific, and he's terrific in person, and he's very funny, and he walked into the green room beforehand. We had a little discussion before I went on about what was happening to the network, to CBS. And it was not all that different from a discussion I had had some weeks before to somebody from CBS News. Now, I'm old enough to remember the great days of CBS. Walter Cronkite, Edward R. Murrow. I mean, we looked to CBS News as the beacon light. And we also looked to late night comedy in a funny way, as a way of satirizing what was happening in the news and bringing the mighty down to at least a level of where we could laugh at them, and maybe they could laugh at themselves. But what has happened now is that CBS is intimidated, and everybody in CBS is worried about that intimidation. And I can also say just about the same for ABC. Again, you cannot appease a tyrant. And we've got to find ways for these institutions to come together and create a common front.
The Supreme Court was set up to be theoretically independent and less influenced by the population and by politics. But as I see the lower court decisions coming out, our only hope, I think, to save our democracy is the Supreme Court. And I just wondered what you think about, it's particularly insular. The public feels like it has even less influence over that. Nobody's elected there, the terms are too long, et cetera. And the balance has changed there. So I'm just wondering, is there any way the public can influence the Supreme Court? And I'm not naive about that. I just see that a lot of these decisions are going to surface up to the John Roberts Court. And if they don't feel any pressure from anybody, or at least that public opinion really wants, that he will be known as the Supreme Court judge that gave away our democracy, whether there's anything we can do effective to counter that.
The answer is no. Well, nothing easily. Look, the Supreme Court, particularly with Trump's appointees, and Alito and Thomas. I mean, Alito and Thomas were bad enough. Add in the nominees, the appointees of Trump, and also the Chief Justice, John Roberts, who doesn't seem to have I was going to say moral compass. I think he does have a moral compass. I think he doesn't understand institutionally what he is doing. He doesn't understand the danger the Supreme Court is in as an institution, because as most of you know, the court has no power other than public opinion. And if it, for example, uses the shadow docket, that is, it issues opinions that are very important opinions, but doesn't even explain itself any longer on those critical opinions, then it loses public confidence. It loses legitimacy. So I would like to say that public opinion matters. I think letters that appear in the New York Times, for example, criticizing the court are not irrelevant. But if we ever get, and I'm saying we, that is the people, the progressive people, but Democrats, but a lot of liberal Republicans, a lot of Republicans who care about the country, ever get back in power, we do have to consider the possibility of limiting the terms of Supreme Court justices. And just a quick note on that, we can do that consistent with Article 3, which keeps these people in place forever. We can do that by simply rotating them out of the Supreme Court and putting them into the courts of appeals. So there's nothing in the Constitution that says a Supreme Court justice has got to be there for life. And that, I think, is almost a necessity.
Mr. Reich, I wanted to join the chorus of thanking you for being so outspoken and assure you that many, many people are listening to you and you give them hope. But I wanted to ask you a question about political strategy and how to act in the political realm to counteract this feeling of powerlessness. And, we heard many times the Obama administration or leaders say, when they go low, we go high. And within the context of like a realpolitik, do you think what Gavin Newsom is doing in California and, fighting fire with fire and taking some risks with perhaps rigging the system to bring it back into balance, how should we think about that? Do you think that's a good pathway that we should support? And do you think all blue states need to kind of take strategies that are that severe?
Well, first of all, let me say that what Gavin Newsom is doing is not simply responding to Texas by saying, we are going to out-gerrymander even Texas. No, Gavin Newsom is saying, Texas, if you gerrymander this way and get 5 more Republican seats, we are going to gerrymander only that much. We are going to get 5 more Democratic seats. In other words, what he's saying to all the blue state governors is we need to make it such that there is no advantage by red state governors in trying to gerrymander. We're taking away all of the incentive. It's like mutually assured destruction in terms of nuclear weapons. It's not a race to the bottom. In fact, this is a way of preserving the system, not creating a race to the bottom. I think he's doing exactly the right thing.
I want to thank you, Mr. Secretary. I run a nonprofit. I'm the founding president of a nonprofit that supports commercial fishermen here in Massachusetts, and it started with the Fishing Families Assistance Centers under your reign as Labor Secretary. So your work still echoes here in Massachusetts, at least. The follow-up question I have is that in the last 30 years, the fishermen here have done an amazing job of 2 things. One is working with the Public Health Department of Massachusetts to define a group of workers that have been left behind by the 21st century. These are workers, we call them workers without a net, workers who have high rates of pain and injury on the job, but don't have access to paid leave and don't have job security. So when you group workers like that, you're talking about fishermen, farmers, loggers, construction workers. If you want to look at more urban workers, you're talking about food service workers, home health workers. And these workers are among the workers in the country who are most likely to die on the job, most likely to die by suicide, most likely to die by an opioid overdose, most likely to be uninsured. And the fishermen of Massachusetts have come up with an awesome plan. They've gathered together community health workers. They provide safety training. They essentially become a human resources department for commercial fishermen. My question to you is this. I want to say some positive things about your generation, which is who I came up under. And, it was President Clinton famously wore a city year sweatshirt. Senator Kennedy, Congressman Frank, the fishermen that I knew who voted for them are voting for President Trump now. And I guess my question to you is there anyone that you can suggest to get the word out? Who these days are promoting programs like this on either side. It feels like there just isn't a serious effort to support workers outside of the union movement, we literally can't find politicians, influencers, just to carry this conversation forward. Alternatively, if you have an idea of any billionaires, we take that too.
As I understood the question, it was that there are lots of workers in sectors that are not unionized that are extremely vulnerable to unemployment, to occupational harm, et cetera, et cetera. Where can those people find political support within the electoral system for their concerns, as they're essentially non-unionized workforce for the most part? Good. How was that?
First of all, let's be very clear about something. The segment of the workforce in the United States that is not only not unionized, but has no job security, that are contract workers, that may have before been doing the same thing that they're now doing as contract workers, but that are now contract workers, and as contract workers have no labor law protections at all. We're talking about 35 to 40% of the entire workforce of the United States. Now, this is a big deal, and it's not being talked about, and it's one of the things that the Democratic Party, if the Democratic Party were the party of the working people, as it should be, would be talking about and screaming about. Because a lot of employers are making people contract workers who should not be contract workers. That is, they are legally entitled to all the labor protections. But above and beyond that, what we ought to do is expand labor law and labor protections to include all contract workers.
You know, Bob, there's one datum that I've used in this regard, which is that according to the Treasury, 35% of American workers lack $400 as an emergency fund should they run into any kind of economic challenge. That's over a third of American workers don't have $400 in hand if an emergency should arise.
Well, yes, and the other statistic, I mean, we could drown in these kinds of statistics. But over 74% of Americans are living paycheck to paycheck, which is pretty much what you are saying. Now, when you have that many people who are that close to economic calamity, you have a society that is inherently insecure. If anything should happen suddenly, I mean, let's say the bottom falls out of the stock market, or we have, God forbid, another pandemic, or anything, we are not prepared. And our workforce is very vulnerable. The economy, therefore, is vulnerable because you can't run an economy if people don't have the money they need to buy all of the things that the economy can produce. And so there is a kind of a vicious underlying cycle here at work. And again, if the Democrats knew what they were doing and had a vision, a moral clarity about what they should be, they would be talking about this.
Thank you. Please forgive the open-ended question, but I wonder if you might say a few words on Dr. Lisa Cook.
So the question is, Lisa Cook at the Federal Reserve, the president firing a member of the Federal Reserve.
This question is about the Federal Reserve. Well, look, most of the public doesn't know what the Federal Reserve does. And most people, therefore, don't know that it's being imperiled in the way it is. The danger here is, and let me put this as simply as I possibly can. Everybody in the world who lends money to the United States, and everybody who indirectly or directly lends money to people who want to buy a home through a mortgage, or anybody who lends money in terms of commercial lending to a small business, all those people who are lenders, they no longer have reason to believe that the United States is committed to fighting inflation. And the more that Donald Trump says, I want to reduce interest rates, and I'm going to put people on the Fed who are going to reduce interest rates, all the lenders of the world are going to ask for a higher and higher risk premium on long-term lending, because they don't know that there's a cop on the beat to prevent inflation. To say this another way, Donald Trump doesn't know what he's doing. On that note, that Donald Trump doesn't know what he's doing, I want to, Richard, first of all, I want to thank you. I want to thank all of you